Well, I could have chosen to begin this lecture with any one of a number of famous images from the history of photography. Images that align photographic objectivity with the work of news reportage, images that align the special ability of photography to capture not a moment in time, but a split second in time, with the ultimate horror of violent death. We're looking at Robert Capa's Death of a Loyalist Militiaman from the Cordoba front in Spain from 1936. We see a soldier caught, we believe, just at the moment of the impact of a bullet, as he will fall to the ground and as he has surely died. There have been a number of questions raised about the veracity of this photograph in terms of when it was taken and where. What I want to hold on to is that this value for photography, the value of photography to capture the world in finer and thinner slices of time, the ability of photography to arrest a world in motion, even carried to the terrible degree of capturing the moment of death, was actually a process that took a while. Took a while in terms of the refinement of photographic technology and exposure times, but also took a while in terms of the refinement of our expectations about photographic conventions of representing reality and photographic conventions of arresting motion and arresting time. All of that is to say that while this image may represent the extreme of photographic instantaneity as a matter of photographic stillness, that is, holding forever, be stilled, the moment of death, in a lot of ways the beginning of photography was informed by that negotiation between movement and stillness. So that when we review this image, just for a moment, an image that we spent a certain amount of time on in the last lecture, Daguerre's View of the Boulevard du Temps from 1839, we remark again upon the push-pull between the still world that is captured by photography and the world in motion, the world of human life, the world of human movement that is incompletely captured. And the fact of the matter is that if one wanted one's image to be described, to be captured in focus and in detail in a photographic image in the mid part of the 19th century, one had to agree to hold still for the camera. That photographic instantaneity was a matter of degree and a matter of perspective. It was not a matter of the quickness of the exposure. So that when we look at this wonderful portrait of two twins from 1855, and this is a daguerreotype portrait, we have to give credit to the determination with which these two women confronted the camera, because the exposure might have taken as long as a matter of minutes. And in fact, to have one's likeness made in the portrait studio of the daguerreotypist in the 19th century was to agree to really severely and strictly becalm yourself in the service of photography. And sometimes people remark about 19th century daguerreotypes how serious and severe everyone looked, but in fact they looked serious and severe because they had to sit there for a certain amount of time, and because it was certainly easier to sit there with a serious expression on your face so as not to ruin your photographic exposure, which wasn't that inexpensive to begin with. And this lovely caricature by Daumier gives you a sense of just how torturous sitting for your photographic portrait might be. It's a kind of ironic image of a bourgeois gentleman submitting to head screws in order to stabilize his face for the photographic exposure. That's not an exaggeration, and sometimes if you look closely in some daguerreotype portraits, you can see just a little hint, it's almost Frankenstein-like, of those head prop devices to which the photographic sitter had to submit in order to have their likeness recorded for posterity. So I want to keep that sense of kind of a willful self-stilling that informed photography's beginnings, and hold it in tension with, on the one hand, the increasing ability of photography as the technology was refined and exposure times became shorter, to begin to capture a more mobile and performative body. We already looked at this sheet of uncut carte de visite photographs by the Parisian photographer Diderie. This is Monsieur Calargui, whoever he was, from 1859. And he is no longer submitting to those long exposures, right? He's able to imagine himself in a variety of poses and a variety of personas, and photographic likeness starts to take on this more sort of mobile, performative quality, in direct opposition to the most terrible stillness of all, again, the stillness of photographic death. We're looking at another very famous example of wartime photography, this one by Timothy H. O'Sullivan. It's got an allegorical title, A Harvest of Death, from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Gettysburg was one of the bloodiest and most devastating battlefields of the U.S. Civil War in the 19th century. And one is given to contemplate the absolute stillness of human mortality, at the same time that, actually, like the Kappa photograph, there was a certain amount of speculation, and there's been a certain amount of historical research done about just how much compositional license O'Sullivan might have permitted himself. That brings us back to photography and the Paris Commune, and we've already looked at this image of the barricades on the Rue Saint-Sébastien from March 18th, 1871, a photograph for which I argued both the wonder of the vision of working class people actually making up their representation in front of the camera, posing before the camera, posing in the barricades that they had built on the streets of Paris on that day. So the wondrousness of working class people not caught in the blur of shining shoes or doing other kinds of labor, but choosing to take on the pose. And also the fact that they had to choose to stand still in order to be in the photographic image at all, that a place in photographic history was a matter of voluntarily becalming oneself. So when we go to look for representations of the newsworthy events of the Paris Commune, we don't find the camera on the scene. It neither was fast enough in terms of exposure times nor mobile enough in terms of the lightness of the equipment to be there at the moment. At the same time, images like this engraving of the execution of Generals Clement Thomas and Lecomte, who were two French army generals who were put to death by summary execution by communard insurgents. Engravings like this would have argued for having the effect of being as truthful as a photograph. And on the other hand, when photography tried to compete with that truthfulness, as it did in the hands of Eugène Appert, and this is another one of those composite images. We looked at one in a previous lecture. This, an image in which carte de visite portraits of the two generals are photographically montaged onto bodies on the exact site when the execution took place, but this time restaged by actors for Appert's camera. And in a very strange way, these composite photographs by Eugène Appert place us in a similar 19th century territory to something like Jeff Wall's A Sudden Gust of Wind After Hokusai, which is to say that Wall asks us to sort of delight in the contradiction between the realism of photography and its artifice, between the fact that it's the photographic image seizes motion and freezes it, and our knowledge of the artifice of his photographic process of making. There's a little bit of a similar thing happening with Appert, because people in the 19th century might have understood that this was an impossible photograph in a way, that photographic technology was incapable of actually being on the scene for this particular event, but they nonetheless would have enjoyed its artifice, the artifice of allowing them to imaginatively consume the news that they missed as if they were a kind of eyewitness. Because at the same time, even the common prisoner knew that the best way to defeat the mugshot in the 19th century was to keep moving. So if we think back to that image of the bourgeois submitting himself to the head screws in order to have his image go down in posterity, what we're looking at here is an engraving of photography as it was first practiced in the prison system in 1875, and we see that it took 3 strong men to try to hold the criminal still for his mugshot, because the criminal was smart enough to know that if he kept moving, it wasn't going to be a very good photographic exposure, and so it wasn't going to be much good in identifying him should he resort to crime after he was released to prison. It took a lot of effort, a lot of physical effort in this case, and a lot of ideological effort in the long run to get people to submit to stillness for the mugshot. So when we end with this image, which is one of, this is Justin Bieber, but we could have chosen any number of celebrities who had the misfortune to be arrested for one sort of instance of misbehavior or another. What we have to acknowledge is the long history of the sort of uses of photography as a mode of enforcing stillness before the camera, that causes us all to automatically assume the pose, whether for our driver's license or passport photograph, or in unfortunate cases for our police mugshot, in order that our likenesses be properly recorded.